Hello and thank you for joining us again on this third leg of our tour of the Northumberland castles. This time we're visiting the castles situated in the north of the county, and we begin here at Chillingham. Chillingham Castle was a monastery in the late 1100s and became a fortified manor house in 1246 when it was acquired by the Grey family, and it still belongs to them today. You'll remember the Greys, we mentioned them at Dunstanburgh. Nothing really of any note happened here until about 1296 during the First War of Scottish Independence, and a Scottish raid destroyed the manor house and it was replaced with a tower house. In 1298 King Edward I stayed here at the castle before his march north to confront William Wallace at Falkirk. Around 1344 Chillingham became fully fortified with dungeons and torture chambers. The layout of the castle was designed with 4 corner towers forming a quadrangle, and this is unusual in the county of Northumberland. Chillingham has had frequent royal visitors over the centuries, including Henry III, James I and Charles I. Several members of the Grey family were tried and executed for treason for opposing the various monarchs of the day in various dispute, siding with the barons. Several more were granted clemency because they had friends in the right places. After the unification of England and Scotland in 1603, the castle was no longer needed as a fort and underwent a gradual change over the centuries into what you see today. The present-day occupants are Sir Humphrey Wakefield, whose family have owned lands in the Lake District for over 400 years, and the Honourable Lady Wakefield. Lady Wakefield was the daughter of Lady Mary Grey from Alnwick. The castle is open to visitors and vacation stays. It is recorded as having the highest percentage of paranormal activity in Britain, so its ghost tours are extremely popular and heavily booked. I must just say, living in Northumberland is a fantastic privilege, because what a beautiful county. In my opinion, it has the most stunning coastline anywhere in Britain. We have mountains, we have moorlands, we have meadows, and just look at this weather. It's absolutely superb. The only time we get bad weather is if the wind is off the North Sea on the east side, or maybe the odd occasion like the beast from the east, which does make things pretty severe here. But as the prevailing winds are westerly, most of the time we enjoy some superb weather. And as I say, the only county in Britain that has so much stunning countryside to look at and explore. And as we are discovering on this series, a fantastic history, again, to me, rivaled nowhere else in Britain. Belford is a coaching town, just literally on the side of the A1, and very, very close to the Northumberland coast, as you can see. West Hall Tower is just outside the village of Belford, about 15 miles south of Berwick-upon-Tweed. And today it's a working farm, as you can probably see. Historical documents suggest there might have been a Motte and Bailey castle here prior to the Norman invasion. In the surrounding land, some evidence, such as earthworks, has been uncovered supporting that idea. However, this is disputed, as a defensive structure would have been more likely on the crags nearby, where the church was thought to be, with a supply of fresh water from Belford Burn. In 1174, William I of Scotland raided Belford as part of his march south against Henry II. His army rounded up all of the women as they tried to escape. Apparently they tried to reach the church on the hill and didn't make it. The report was that most of them were raped and murdered. Edward III stayed here on his return from the Battle of Halidon Hill at Berwick in 1333, and at that time West Hall was just a fortified manor house, not a tower as you're seeing now. By the early 1400s, the manor house had been replaced by a tower with a surrounding moat. Then in Queen Elizabeth I's reign, Belford became an important part of a network of postal towns which were used for sending royal messages from town to town. The present tower is of a Victorian architecture built in 1837 in a castellated Gothic style, and it is a working farm. We've been very kindly given permission to film and include it in the series, so we thank the owners for that. Hello, and here we are at Cartington, a hamlet 2 miles outside the village of Rothbury. We're not actually able to get to the castle because the land around the castle is owned by a farmer and he doesn't like public trooping across it. So you can see the castle up on the top right hand corner of your picture, and this is the closest we can get to it. The name Cartington is derived from the Norwegian word Kjartan, home of the Kjartan people, who were maybe the first to settle here. The first mention of a castle is in 1154, when it belonged to Ralph Fitzmaine. Sometime in the 1300s, a peel tower was added, no doubt to provide protection during the border conflicts with the Scots, as we are only 12 miles south of the border here. In 1422, John Cartington was granted permission to crenellate the castle and extend the buildings to include a great hall. The next major event at Cartington was 1515, when Margaret, Queen of Scots, stayed here with her baby daughter Margaret as they fled back to London. Margaret Tudor, as she was known, was the sister of Henry VIII and had married James IV of Scotland in 1503. But after King James's death in 1513 in the Battle of Flodden, she became the regent to Scotland as her son, James V, was still a child. Being the sister of an English king made her unpopular in Scotland, and she was deposed by the Duke of Albany. Cartington was the first safe place across the border she could reach as she fled to London. The next significant event here was between 1642 and 1651 during the English Civil War between the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, and Cartington was a major royalist centre supporting Charles I. In 1648 it was besieged by the parliamentarians and wrecked, making it unusable as a defence. The castle remained occupied until 1860, when it was abandoned. In 1887, Lord Armstrong of Cragside Hall partially restored it to prevent its complete disintegration. This is the first castle we've come across where we've been refused absolute permission to go and look. So I apologise for that, but as I did say at the beginning of this series, there were certain castles which were just simply out of bounds, and this is the first one we've come across that has fitted into that category. So I hope it hasn't disappointed you in any way. Hello, and on another beautiful day here in Northumberland, we are at Preston Tower, about 10 miles north of Alnwick, and not to be confused with Preston Tower in East Lothian in Scotland. There's not much evidence of who built this tower, but we do know it was built in 1392. The original tower was much larger than this, about twice the size as it is now, and had 4 corner turrets. It sort of extended backwards from the tower that's there now. Some of the mason's marks in the large stones at the base of the tower have identical marks to those of Warkworth Castle, so it seems to have belonged originally to someone with status. Of course, normal, ordinary dwellings were useless here because of the border conflicts. Peel towers were the only option that afforded a degree of safe living in medieval Northumberland, that is, if you could afford one. The word peel comes from an old French word, pelle, translated into English is pile. As we have learned, most early fortified enclosures were constructed of timber stakes or piles, and so over time the word pell became peel and was used to describe a wide range of defensible structures, but especially towers like this one. During the 1500s, the tower was owned by Sir Guiscard Harbottle, who was killed in the Battle of Flodden in 1513. Again, as with all towers and castles in Northumberland, after 1603, fortified houses were no longer required. The border wars were ended and the border reivers were at peace, and peace finally prevailed. Preston Tower was partly demolished and the stone used for other projects and farm buildings on the estate. Only the south wall and the two corner turrets remained. In 1864, some restoration was carried out to create an enclosed tower with rooms, which is what we have today. The clock was added at the same time, which has a similar mechanism to that of Big Ben in London. The tower is privately owned by Harry Baker Cresswell, and it is open to the public, so we can go inside and have a look at this one. There's an honesty box at the door for donations, £2 for an adult and £1.50 for a concession. So let's go inside and have a look. Hello and welcome again. Here we are on another lovely day in Northumberland. We're here at Harbottle today, just a few miles south and east of Alnwick, which is situated in the northwest corner of Northumberland, on the edge of the vast Northumberland moorland, which separates England and Scotland at this point on the border. The castle is up there on the mound behind me, and we'll be going up there shortly to see it more closely. The mound that Harbottle Castle sits on was a site used by ancient Britons, and in the Anglo-Saxon period there was a stronghold here held by Mildred, son of Acman. Henry II gave the lands around Harbottle in 1157 to the de Umfraville family, who were cousins to William the Conqueror, on the condition that they raised a castle to deter Scots from claiming Northumberland. It took them till 1160 to build the castle, but by then they'd built a huge octagonal timber motte and bailey. The motte is over 12 metres high, that's 40 feet in old money, surrounded by a ditch 2 metres deep. The outer bailey is surrounded by a ditch 10 metres deep or 30 feet. In 1174, the castle was captured by William I of Scotland during his campaign to overthrow King Henry in alliance with Henry's wife and sons. The castle was taken back soon after, when William was killed in the Battle of Alnwick. The castle was then strengthened by the addition of a stone keep and curtain wall erected by O'Donnell de Umfraville. During the First War of Independence in 1296, John Balliol attacked the castle but failed to take it as the new defences withstood the assault. After Edward I's death, his weaker son Edward II lost the Battle of Bannockburn, and Robert the Bruce turned the war in Scotland's favour. He attacked Harbottle in 1318, slighting it to prevent the English from using it. In 1327, Edward II was overthrown by his son Edward III, and he restarted the war with Scotland. So in 1336, Harbottle was rebuilt to control the border. Harbottle went through a period of decline as it was no longer needed after King David II's defeat and capture in 1346 at the Battle of Neville's Cross in Durham. The border region became a wild and lawless place due to the border reivers, and Harbottle was once again restored towards the end of the 1300s as a secure base for the wardens of the marches. In 1515, Margaret Tudor, the widow of James IV, having fled Scotland, was granted political asylum by Henry VIII and given Harbottle as her residence with her second husband, the Earl of Douglas. You'll recall Margaret first escaped to Cartington, but once she'd got to London, that's when Henry gave her Harbottle as a permanent base. In 1524, she was able to return to Scotland as her son James V became king. Further building work was carried out between 1541 and 1563. After the union of England and Scotland in 1603, the castle became superfluous, as most of them did, as you've already heard. In 1605, James VI of Scotland and First of England granted the castle to George Home, Lord Treasurer of Scotland. George dismantled it and used the materials for building the Harbottle village as right at the foot of the castle, and other projects. The castle fell into ruin and it was never repaired. Hello, and on another fabulous day here in Northumberland, we're here at Horsley Tower in the village of Long Horsley, which is about 9 miles south of Rothbury on the A697, which of course is one of the main routes between Morpeth and Coldstream on the Scottish border. As you can see, the tower is a private residence, but the owner has kindly granted us permission to film it, and it's not open to public viewing. And they've very kindly agreed to let us see inside, because this particular tower is pretty much intact as it would have been built in the medieval period. Long Horsley was originally known as Horseegg, meaning woodland clearing where horses are kept. Long Horsley has a long history going back to the Roman occupation. A Roman road referred to as the Devil's Causeway passes close to Long Horsley, and it can be traced from Portgate on Hadrian's Wall to the mouth of the River Tweed at Berwick. The Devil's Causeway crossed Long Horsley Moor, a high, bleak area which possibly gave rise to its name, in addition to the constant threat of ambush from the nomadic inhabitants who resided here. It is generally thought that the tower was built in the early 1500s by Sir Thomas Horsley from the Horsley family of Brinkburn near Rothbury. He became a prominent citizen of Newcastle, acting as magistrate and sheriff. An event of significance was that General George Monk stayed here on his way south to help restore Charles II to the throne. We mentioned Monk in the Scottish Borders film last year as being the founder of the New Model Army based in Coldstream. Horsley Tower is a typical peel tower and in perfect condition as it would have been in the 1500s, simply because it was part of an estate and never altered or tampered with in any way. The difference is it had 4 floors instead of 3, with living quarters on the upper floors and the vaulted basement below, which we can see here. This would have originally been used to house valuable livestock, as we've already mentioned. As you can see here, this was the dungeon, and the prisoners were thrown in through this hole in the ceiling. This recess in the wall was the toilet, which actually emptied to the outside of the building. And here you can see the spiral staircase still intact from 1500. The bar you can see extending across the window as it is presently was the ram raid bar behind the main access door on this vaulted basement. So as I say, this would have been the original doorway. There is some idea that there may have been a much earlier tower here that was laid to ruin and that the present one is a reconstruction, but there's no definite evidence of this. Horsley Tower passed to the Widdrington family in 1685, who converted the upper floor into a chapel and the intermediate floors into a priest's residence, at the same time adding an extension on the north side as servants' quarters. You can see that just behind me there. The tower changed hands again in 1763 when it passed to the Riddell family through marriage. The chapel remained on the upper floor till 1841, when the present church was built adjacent to the tower. And you can see that here. However, the tower was still used as a priest's residence until 1926, which was the first time in its history it had been sold, and at that point the tower was converted into a private residence. We've mentioned the word reiver and border reiver a few times now, and in case you weren't aware, the word reiver is an English noun meaning to rob or plunder. You might say the border raiders as well as the border reivers. And there's an interesting twist to end on. The present owner is an Elliot Northumbrian reiver family. Now, the Elliots were based towards Kielder on the very west of the county, not based in Horsley Tower, but a prime example of what I spoke about right at the beginning of this series, an intricate woven web of intrigue. Always something going on here. Well, hello, here we are, another day, another fantastic day here in Northumberland with wall-to-wall blue skies. And for those of you who thought Northumberland was this cold, drab, drizzly, grey place, well, look with your own eyes, there's the evidence. And I can assure you, This isn't a green screen, it's real. We're here at Edlingham, and it's about 7 or 8 miles northwest of Alnwick along the B6341, which is more commonly known to us Northumbrians as the Crags Road. You can probably see just up on the ridge there behind me. The road tracks along the edge of Alnwick Moor with some spectacular views off the top there over the Northumberland countryside. Well worth a visit. So some of you'll remember we visited this last year in the rural Northumberland video, but I wanted to go into it in a little bit more depth this time. Around 1174, a John of Edlingham owned a manor house on this site, and in 1294 a descendant, Walter of Edlingham, sold it to William de Felton. Felton made his fortune in military service and royal favour, having further estates in Norfolk and Shropshire. Felton fortified the manor house, adding a gatehouse and surrounding walls to protect against marauding Scots. In 1296, when Edward I marched into Scotland to take control, it began 300 years of conflict, as we've already been hearing. And it was mostly fought along this border region on both sides of the border. Around 1340 to 1350, his son, also named William, built the tower that you see left standing today. His descendants continued to strengthen the walls and the gatehouse as the Anglo-Scottish Wars continued. And I'm being interrupted by a herd of cows. In 1396, Elizabeth Felton inherited the castle when she married Edmund Hastings. It then passed down the Hastings family until 1514, when it was sold to George Swinburne, whose family held it until the 18th century, though no one lived in it from about 1660 onwards. The owners after Felton were gentry, not military families. So during these years it was not maintained as a stronghold and fell steadily into disrepair. Once the wars ceased, much of the stone was taken to build nearby farmhouses, and as is the story for most of these disused castles in Northumberland. It became state-owned in 1975 and is now in the care of English Heritage. Well, here we are on another fantastic, beautiful blue sky day here in Northumberland. And of course the castle there behind me doesn't take much of an introduction either. It is of course Alnwick Castle. World renowned now because of the Harry Potter films that were filmed here, but it has also hosted many films and TV series over the years, including Downton Abbey, Dungeons and Dragons, War of the Roses, Transformers, and a Disney film from 1978 called The Spaceman in King Arthur, featuring the late Kenneth More and John Le Mesurier. in which I was an extra, a soldier no less. So what do we know about the castle's history? The first castle here was built around 1096 by the Baron of Alnwick, a Norman nobleman named Ivo de Vesci, to protect the river crossing over the River Aln. The castle is first mentioned in 1136 when it was captured by David I of Scotland. At that time we know it was a motte and bailey construction. The castle was besieged again in 1173 and 1174 by William I of Scotland, or William the Lion as he was also known. If you recall from the Berwick episode, King Henry II of England was fighting a revolt during this time against his wife and 2 sons. William saw his opportunity to invade Northumberland and take back his parental inheritance, which had been taken from him by the Anglo-Normans. In 1173, William actually took Alnwick and then went on to attack Newcastle and Prudhoe. But he found the defences too strong, especially in Prudhoe, and had to retreat back to Scotland. When he tried again in 1174, he was defeated in the Battle of Alnwick. And although he was sitting here waiting for the main English army that had been fighting further south, he was surprised by a dawn raid by a small army of English noblemen, and that's what caused his defeat. Following the death of the last of the de Vesci heirs, it fell to Anthony Beck, the Bishop of Durham, in 1297. Beck sold the castle to Henry Percy in 1309, and Henry became the first Baron and Warden of the Marches. The holders of this title were responsible for security along the border. I've spoken frequently in this series about the Marches, and in particular the Wardens of the Marches. So what are the Marches? Well, the word march comes from a very ancient Indo-European word, mereg. The Latin derivative of that ancient word was margo, from which we got margin or border. The Anglo-Saxon derivative of that word was miarch, meaning edge or boundary, and it was that Anglo-Saxon word which led to the use of march to describe a land border. So we can now see that the marches that we are referring to here were areas of land around the border region of England and mirrored on both sides of the border. They were actually drawn up by Henry III and Alexander III of Scotland in 1249, and they were meant to provide a buffer zone between the Scots and the English. So the Warden of the Marches was responsible for overseeing these areas and making sure the monarch's kingdom remained secure. Over the subsequent generations, the Percy lords extended the castle into what it is today, and as you can see, it's quite extensive. The Percy family are descended from the Norman nobleman William de Percy, who came to England after the invasion of 1066, and he was given lands in Yorkshire, and the Percy family have always had strong Yorkshire connections and loyalties even to this day. Throughout the 13 and 1400s, the Percy family were in constant feud with the Lancastrian Neville family, and it's said by some that this led to the start of the War of the Roses. Towards the end of the 30-year conflict, Alnwick fell into Lancastrian hands for a short period of 10 years, and then was returned to the Percys by Edward IV. The 7th Earl of Northumberland was a Thomas Percy, and he was executed for treason following his part in the attempt to depose Queen Elizabeth I and replace her with Mary Queen of Scots. Later, the 9th Earl was another Henry Percy, and he was a Knight of the Garter, the most senior order of knighthood in Elizabeth's court. Of course, Elizabeth died without an heir, and James VI of Scotland succeeded the English throne in 1603 and so became James I of England. The 9th Earl, despite being a Knight of the Garter, was suspected of being involved in the gunpowder plot of 1605 and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. This began a century of the castle here at Alnwick being without a significant Percy in residence. In 1650, Oliver Cromwell used Alnwick Castle as a prison following the Battle of Dunbar. The Percys returned to the castle in the late 1700s with Elizabeth Seymour, who was the Duchess of Northumberland. She married Hugh Smithson, who adopted the Percy name so that the Percy legacy could continue. They employed James Payne, Daniel Garrett and Capability Brown to remodel the castle and its grounds. The present 12th Duke of Northumberland is Ralph Percy, and his wife, the Duchess, is Lady Jane Percy. They reside here at the castle and have brought it very much into the 21st century as a popular tourist attraction, wedding venue, and, as we said at the beginning, film location. The Duchess was the inspiration behind the redevelopment of Alnwick Garden and the construction of the Alnwick Tree House. Again, very, very popular attractions here. As we mentioned in the rural Northumberland video, this is the Percy lion, the symbol of the Percy family. Well, that concludes this section, and what a fantastic castle to end this section on. Subscription doesn't cost anything, but it helps my films to be seen by a wider audience. So if you haven't already done so, please subscribe and hit that notification button so that you'll receive updates of all my latest releases. Next, we move a little further south to the central belt of Northumberland, so please join us for that.